Stop crying. You got his money, didn't you? His sister sneered across the casket. Carolyn Ames, wife of 41 years, didn't shed a tear. Dean's nephew Colby stood beside her, smirking, already calling it his house. By sunrise, their keys stopped working. Their names were erased from every clause. Dean had trusted Carolyn to survive them all, and she did. Now the widow they mocked is the executor they'll answer to. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The flowers hadn't even begun to wilt when the real rot showed itself. Carolyn stood near the back of the funeral hall, hands clasped tight over the front of her coat. The air smelled like lilies and polished wood, too clean, too staged. Her husband of 41 years had been laid to rest that morning, and yet the only thing colder than the casket was the way his family now looked at her. Jill approached first, Dean's sister, eyes sharp, lips already curled in something between pity and possession. "Well," Jill said, voice smooth as varnish, "stop crying. You got his money, didn't you?" Colby stood just behind her, arms crossed over his trim navy suit. The corner of his mouth twitched up, like he couldn't quite help the smirk. Carolyn didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She simply tightened her grip on the lapels of her coat, holding them closed like a shield. Jill let out a short, fake laugh. "Look, no hard feelings. You'll be looked after. We'll be in touch about the house and arrangements." Arrangements. Carolyn nodded once, barely. The room around them had grown quiet. Most mourners now filtered into the parking lot. Only Harper remained, lingering a few respectful paces behind, her gaze locked on Jill like a lit match waiting for the strike. "Come on," Harper said gently, touching Carolyn's elbow. "Let's get some air." Outside, the sun was low and indirect. March in Connecticut hadn't quite surrendered winter yet. The wind carried a bite, and Carolyn leaned into it like she wanted to feel something sharp. Harper opened the car door for her, without asking. Carolyn sank into the passenger seat and stared straight ahead, unblinking. "I suppose grief's an inconvenience to them," Carolyn murmured, her voice flat. Harper didn't respond. She knew better. "They think they've already won," Carolyn added, "that he's dead and I'm just the delay in their direct deposit." Silence held between them like breath before a verdict. Then, slowly, Carolyn opened her handbag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. Across the front, Dean's handwriting, neat, meticulous, read, "Backup directive. Only open if they turn cold." Harper blinked. "He wrote that?" Carolyn nodded. 7 years ago, after his first heart scare. Said he didn't want it in the official file. Said I'd know when to use it. "Is it time?" Harper asked, eyes narrowing. Carolyn didn't hesitate. "They mocked me before they even buried him. Yes, it's time." She slit the envelope open with her nail, slow and careful. Inside, a folded letter and a single sheet with typed instructions, bank names, account aliases, trust labels, something called Operation Sundial. Harper skimmed the page. Her accountant brain flickered to life. "These are asset reroutes, shell clauses, dormant trusts with reversionary clauses tied to your signature." "Exactly," Carolyn said. "He built escape hatches into the estate, but only for me." Harper's mouth twisted into a grin. "If we move fast, they won't see it coming." "They never saw me to begin with," Carolyn said softly. "I was just the polite woman who brought him coffee during board meetings." Outside the car, Jill walked past the driver's side window, her face blank now, already rehearsing her version of the inheritance. Carolyn didn't watch her. She was focused on the page in Harper's lap, the blueprint to everything they assumed they already owned. Back in the church vestibule, the funeral director dimmed the lights. The building emptied, but Carolyn wasn't finished. Not by a long stretch. Harper slipped the directive back into the envelope and looked over. "You want me to call Leon?" "Not yet," Carolyn said. "Let's see if they still think it's mine." She reached back into her bag, past tissues, mints, and funeral bulletins, and pulled out a smaller envelope. This one was addressed in Jill's handwriting. "To Carolyn. We'll be in touch about the estate." Carolyn slid it unopened into the glove box. She pulled out a second, thinner envelope, this one marked in Dean's ink. "Personal, do not share. For Carolyn only. The envelope felt heavier now that Dean was gone. Carolyn unfolded the handwritten letter on her kitchen table, the air thick with old grief and new calculation. Her fingers were steady, her expression unreadable as she scanned Dean's tidy cursive, familiar, methodical, confident even in death. If they turn cold, turn off the tap. You'll know when. I trust your silence more than their condolences. Below the line sat a bulleted list: trusts, secondary account titles, dormant LLCs, safety nets hidden in plain sight, and a final note, underlined, Asset Group B must be rekeyed within 30 days. After that, the rights revert. Carolyn didn't cry. She didn't blink. Instead, she slid the page toward Harper, who sat across from her, already booting up her laptop with surgical calm. They were never locked, Harper muttered, eyes darting across screens, fingers tapping rapidly. But they will be. These are structured as conditional benefit clauses. Dean built time delays into them. We've got maybe 2 weeks before the reversion windows close. Long enough, Carolyn said. The smell of cinnamon tea steeped nearby, but the air felt sharper than that, like ink and steel and numbers. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft and soundless against the window panes. A quiet war was beginning, and it was going to be fought in legal codes, not raised voices. Carolyn picked up the landline. Her voice was flat, composed. Leon, I need you to halt all estate disbursements immediately. Leon Burke didn't ask why. You know this won't sit quietly, Carolyn. I'm not asking it to. I'm asking it to sit legally. A pause. Then, I'll send the paperwork over in the morning. You'll need to sign. I'll have Harper notarize it tonight, she replied. No loose ends. Across the room, Harper had pulled up the holding structures for the Ames Estate Reserve. Look at this, she said, spinning her screen around. Colby's been named as a consultant on 2 business files. Dean didn't sign that. I told Dean years ago Colby would try something slippery, Carolyn said. He said, let him try. I'll make the slope steeper. She leaned back, her eyes catching the fireplace mantel where Dean's photo now sat, formal, confident, unknowingly posthumous. He'd built his empire brick by brick. Now Carolyn would secure the mortar. Her phone buzzed. A text. Jill, we'll be in touch about the estate. Don't make things awkward. Carolyn handed the phone to Harper, who read it aloud and chuckled darkly. Awkward? She doesn't even realize the tap's already dripping dry. Carolyn stood and crossed to the liquor cabinet, pouring a splash of brandy into her teacup. She raised it slightly toward the fire. To the silent clauses, she said. To the widow they underestimated, Harper replied, lifting her mug. Carolyn took a slow sip. They think grief makes you soft, but it just makes you precise. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the driveway, muting the world. The mailboxes stayed full that week, but the checks never came. Leon Burke's letterhead arrived in Colby's inbox at precisely 9 a.m. Subject line, Notice of Temporary Suspension of Distribution from the Estate of Dean R. Ames. No preamble, no warning, just a clean legal block of text citing irregular activity, pending fiduciary review, and interim freeze pursuant to Article 9. Colby read it 3 times, jaw tightening with each pass. His phone buzzed. Then again, and again. Still haven't wired the retainer? One message read. Need confirmation of funds by Friday, said another. A voice message. Colby, you promised this was locked in. I fronted the deposit already. He slammed his laptop shut, muttering something ugly under his breath. Across town, Jill stared at the same letter, fuming over her tea, her hands shaking just slightly as she tossed the envelope aside like it might burn her. Paused for review, she scoffed. This is Carolyn's doing. She's playing the long-suffering act while pulling strings behind the curtain. So that afternoon, Jill drove straight to the old colonial house Dean and Carolyn had shared for decades, the same one Jill had once called too modest for someone of Dean's status. She rang the bell twice, no answer. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she could just make out movement, a shadow crossing the hall, slow but purposeful, then stillness. Jill rang again, knocked. Carolyn, I know you're in there. Still nothing. I just want to talk, she lied. From the second floor, Harper stood beside the window, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. Carolyn sat in a velvet chair nearby, unmoved. "You want me to say something?" Harper asked quietly. "No," Carolyn said. She brought her voice. "I'm keeping mine." Downstairs, Jill muttered curses as she stepped off the porch. The brand-new deadbolt caught her eye, reinforced, gleaming. Not the original. "Petty!" she hissed, walking back to her car. Inside, Harper returned to her laptop, scrolling through the estate's accounts. "They thought you'd just freeze up after the funeral, but you're the one doing the freezing." "Check Colby's line items," Carolyn said, setting down her tea. "He wasn't smart enough to wait for approval." Harper narrowed her eyes, fingers flying. "Hold on. What is this? There's a payment." Flagged as Strategic Advisory Retainer, dated a week before Dean passed. $8,500, pulled from the dormant Ames Capital Legacy account. Carolyn raised an eyebrow. That account wasn't even supposed to be touched. Dean had it locked for investment reserve. "It gets better," Harper said. 2 more withdrawals, same memo line, all within 10 days. One of them routed to an LLC Colby registered last year. Same address as his condo. Carolyn leaned forward. Her voice was even. "Let's audit him before we bury anything else." Harper smirked, already opening spreadsheets. There's always a digital footprint, even when they think they're dancing in socks. In the silence between keyboard clicks, the house felt more alive than it had in weeks. No mourning music, no casseroles, no empty condolences, just momentum. Carolyn rose and walked into Dean's study, her slippers quiet against the hardwood. She opened a drawer she hadn't touched since the week he died. Tucked between legal pads and ink refills was a small red leather ledger. She brought it back into the room and handed it to Harper. Dean always said, "Paper whispers what mouths won't admit." Harper flipped it open. Neat entries, dates, marginal notes, initials. "This ledger matches the frozen business account. Wait." She paused, her brows furrowing as she turned the page. "Carolyn." "What?" "This signature right here." She tapped the bottom line of a transfer slip. "It's Dean's name, but the stroke isn't right. It's mirrored. And look at the loop on the D. He always hooked it counterclockwise. This one's clockwise. I'd bet my license it's forged." Carolyn watched from the kitchen window as Jill's silver sedan rolled slowly past the house. Again. The 4th drive-by that week. This time, Jill wasn't alone. Colby sat in the passenger seat, gesturing with his hands toward the front porch like a real estate agent prepping for an open house. The audacity felt surgical. Less a surprise, more a pattern. That same afternoon, Harper forwarded Carolyn an email chain she intercepted through her firm's account monitoring software. Jill to Colby. "We'll need to repaint the front parlor. Beige is dead. And that chandelier? Straight out of a 1994 funeral home." Carolyn didn't respond. She just placed her cup down a little harder than usual. The following morning, Harper dropped a folded deed onto Carolyn's dining table. The header read, "Warranty Deed, 45 Henley Avenue." Harper tapped the top corner. "Sole owner, Carolyn Ames. Since April 2008, Carolyn smiled without warmth. They assumed," Harper nodded, "never asked." Leon chimed in via speakerphone from his office downtown. "They've always believed the house was part of the shared estate, tied to Dean's name." "It was," Carolyn said, folding the paper neatly. "Once." She turned toward the window. The wind shook the tulips near the stone path. Dean had planted those in 2014, after his first bypass. "If I went first," he'd said, "they'd bloom for you." Instead, they bloomed while people measured curtain rods and scoped the square footage. That afternoon, Carolyn scheduled a locksmith. 2 hours later, every lock on every door was changed. She upgraded to a coded entry system, the kind with rolling encryption. Jill returned 2 days later and walked up to the door like she belonged there. Her key turned nothing. Her jaw tightened. She knocked. No answer. Instead, a quiet camera above the doorway blinked red. Carolyn stood behind the living room curtain, sipping tea, Nora Jones playing low in the background. Later, she walked out with the last remnants of the funeral arrangements. The lilies were browning at the edges. She carried them in both arms like offerings and gently placed them on the curb next to the recycling bin. The soft scent of decay lifted in the breeze. She didn't speak. She didn't look back. Inside, Harper clicked away at her laptop. "So, I traced the rest of those consulting fees Colby pulled. They weren't just for that shell company. He used Dean's dormant business account to pay off his personal credit card. Twice. How much? Almost $6,200. Carolyn let out a slow breath. Itemize everything. Dates, vendors, purpose. Attach screenshots, too. Already done. Harper clicked once more and swiveled her screen around. Also, I drafted this. Across the top, motion to reclaim misappropriated funds, Colby Ames. Carolyn skimmed the opening paragraph, her eyes narrowing with each line. Make it sharper, and add one more clause. Harper paused. Which one? That if he contests, we'll refer the forged signature on Dean's ledger to state fraud investigators. You want to escalate this now? No, Carolyn said. I want them to feel what real silence sounds like. Legal silence. No more emotional conversations, just certified paper. She stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up the photo of her and Dean from their 25th anniversary. Him in a charcoal suit, her in deep plum, both smiling with a kind of comfort only earned through decades, not bought through inheritance. Carolyn wiped the dust from the frame with the sleeve of her cardigan. Let them keep planning their remodels, she said. By the time they realize what's missing, the walls will be mine, and the floors under their feet will remind them who swept up first. Harper clicked send. The motion zipped into the court's digital system. Then, quietly, she added Colby's name to a separate folder labeled Active Targets. The call took less than 7 minutes, but its echo would last for months. Carolyn sat at her kitchen table, cordless phone resting against her shoulder, fingers poised on a notepad. A breeze stirred the lace curtain above the sink, and the low hum of the refrigerator buzzed like a clock ticking down to detonation. Please confirm, she said evenly, that no further withdrawals will be honored unless I approve them. The bank manager's voice was calm, clipped. Yes, Mrs. Ames. All accounts connected to the Ames Family Trust and shared fiduciary vehicles are now frozen pending probate clearance and fraud review. Carolyn tapped her pen once. Good. She hung up before the manager could ask anything else. 2 towns over, Colby stood beneath the glass dome of a luxury car dealership, waiting to finalize a lease on a graphite-colored Range Rover Sport. He slid his gold Amex across the desk with a practiced grin, thumb brushing the trim of his cufflink. The salesman scanned the card, then blinked, then tried again. Sir, I'm getting a blocked authorization notice. Colby's smile twitched. That's impossible. Try it again. A third swipe. Nothing. He checked his phone. 3 notifications. Bank alert. Transaction denied. A fourth. Carolyn Ames has changed access permissions. He froze, color draining from his face. Across town, Jill pressed submit on a routine funds transfer from the old family support account. It bounced. She stared at the screen. Session expired. A second attempt triggered a message. This account has been suspended due to fiduciary reassessment. Please contact your estate representative. Her hands curled around the keyboard like claws. Back at Carolyn's home, Harper reviewed digital logs from the firm's systems. The company accountant just confirmed Colby was accessing Dean's old discretionary fund without oversight. For months, has that access been revoked? Carolyn asked. Just did it. Carolyn exhaled slowly. Then let's make it official. Harper's fingers moved quickly over the keys, compiling documents, cross-checking accounts, listing dates. Her glasses reflected rows of numbers and footnotes. Each click sounded like a countdown. We're submitting a formal motion to probate, Harper said, stating clear mismanagement of trust-based assets. I've tied every irregular debit to Colby's timeline. Carolyn reached for her cup of tea, still warm, slightly honeyed, and sipped once before responding. No need to gloat, she said. Just file it. Hours later, her phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. She pressed play. Colby's voice poured through the speaker, low and furious. You think you're clever? You think Dean would have wanted this? You have no idea what you're starting, Carolyn. Undo this or it gets ugly. She saved the message. That evening, Jill sent a series of texts in their usual clipped, backhanded tone. We need to talk about optics. This isn't what Dean would have wanted. Family doesn't do this to family. Carolyn responded with a single period. She took her evening walk as usual, past the hydrangeas that Dean planted on their 30th anniversary, past the old oak where they used to drink iced tea in summer. It was brisk, quiet, not peaceful, but beginning to be. When she returned, the porch light was glowing. Harper was standing there, holding her phone, lips pressed into a line. "Leon just called," she said. "You'll want to sit down." Carolyn didn't. "They've officially filed contest paperwork," Harper continued. "Colby's lawyer claims Dean was under undue influence when finalizing his will. They're going to challenge everything." Carolyn didn't blink. Her hand found the edge of the banister, resting steady. "Let them," she said. The courtroom air was heavy with perfume and posturing. Jill sat at the plaintiff's table in a pressed gray blazer, eyes sharp and glassy. Colby leaned back, one ankle tossed over his knee like he thought it made him look important. Their lawyer, a man who had clearly mistaken volume for merit, stood and launched into a performance dressed up as litigation. "Your Honor, we believe Mrs. Carolyn Ames exerted undue influence over the decedent, Mr. Dean Ames, in the final years of his life." Harper exhaled sharply beside Carolyn. Carolyn didn't move, resulting in an estate arrangement that deviates severely from long-standing family expectations. The judge, a wiry woman with a reputation for cutting through nonsense, didn't flinch. "Do you have evidence of coercion?" The lawyer hesitated. "We have testimony. From Mr. Ames's nephew? Testimony from an interested party," the judge cut in. "Noted." Carolyn remained still, the only motion in her lap, the slow click of her pen cap. Open, shut, open again. Harper stood with a black binder in hand and walked forward. "Your Honor, defense would like to submit into evidence Exhibits A through K." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a range." Marriage certificate from 1982, photographs of Mr. and Mrs. Ames over 4 decades, scans of birthday cards he wrote in his handwriting, joint charitable donations, financial ledgers, medical records showing Mr. Ames was of sound mind, and a video dated 3 weeks before his death. He's reading the trust documents out loud. There was no dramatic gasp from the other side, just the creak of Jill's teeth grinding. Carolyn still didn't speak. She didn't need to. The documents spoke louder than any defense. 4 decades of tax returns. A mortgage in both names paid off in full. Travel stubs, signed holiday checks to nieces and nephews. Evidence not of manipulation, but of life, shared and intact. Colby looked like someone had unplugged his spine. Jill reached for her water bottle and missed. The judge leafed through the documents with clinical interest. "I'm dismissing the claim of undue influence. There's no merit here. This estate stands." Jill stood too fast, chair screeching behind her. "He promised us. He said we'd be—" "Sit down," the judge said flatly. Carolyn closed her folder with a quiet snap. The moment felt like exhaling after a winter storm, brisk, sharp, final. In the hallway, Harper pulled out her phone, the screen already glowing with a draft email. "We can file sanctions. Waste of court resources." Carolyn shook her head. "No need." Harper blinked. "Then what do we do?" Carolyn slid a manila envelope from her bag and handed it over. "Just press print." Inside was a formal reimbursement invoice, 4 pages long, itemized. Total $114,287.03, each dollar marked and explained, unauthorized withdrawals, questionable consulting fees, personal spending from a dormant business account that Dean had never intended Colby to touch. "And what do you want me to do with it?" Harper asked. "Send it registered," Carolyn said, "and make sure he has to sign for it." The envelope hit Colby's mailbox like a silent grenade. Inside, neat as a blade, was a 4-page invoice from Carolyn Ames. Total due, $114,287.03. Every cent tracked, every lie unspooled. The paper smelled faintly of lavender printer ink and unshakable precision. At the top, in Harper's calm font, subject, misappropriated estate funds, reimbursement request, itemized by Harper Lynn, CPA Carolyn had refused to round down. Colby's name appeared 27 times. Each charge matched to a bank statement, date-stamped, with notations like private car detail disguised as memorial expense and miscellaneous entertainment. Not estate approved. "You sure this is the tone you want?" Harper had asked, her fingers poised above the keyboard. Carolyn had stared out the window, tea cooling untouched beside her. "He kept asking what I had left." "This." They mailed the invoice registered, requiring Colby's signature. Harper also submitted a digital copy through his attorney's secure client portal. No room for denial, no room for excuses. 3 days later, Colby posted a message on Facebook. "Funny how grief brings out the accountants. Some people can't let the dead rest without adding a $sign." Carolyn read it in silence, took a screenshot, and dragged it into a folder titled Retaliation Attempts, Folder B. Harper rolled her eyes. Passive-aggressive with bad grammar. It's giving 8th grade energy. The next morning, a large box was delivered to Carolyn's front steps. It looked like a sympathy gift. Wicker basket, crisp white bow, tasteful cream card. But inside was nothing but crumpled tissue and a single note scrawled in Sharpie. "Enjoy your win." Carolyn didn't flinch. She set the note on the kitchen counter, poured a fresh cup of tea, and calmly called her waste service to schedule a pickup. That evening, Jill tried to reach Harper, an email with the subject, "Let's talk, just us." Harper didn't open it. She marked it unread, archived it, and poured another splash of red wine into her glass. The doorbell rang just as the sun dipped below the trees. Harper opened the door, holding her phone and a fresh envelope. "We good?" she asked. Carolyn nodded, folding a dish towel in her hands with slow, exacting care. "Did he sign for it?" Carolyn asked. "Signature confirmed at 10:04 this morning. Guess who had to pick it up at the FedEx hub himself?" Carolyn almost smiled. "Almost." "He's going to make noise," Harper added. "He can scream into his lawyer's voicemail," Carolyn replied. They sat at the kitchen island, the only sound the soft clink of Harper's glass and the ticking wall clock Dean had fixed 20 years ago. It still ran perfectly. Some things held up better than people. "What now?" Harper asked. Carolyn looked at the calendar on the fridge, marked with a single red X over the day Dean died. "We give him something worse than debt," she said. "We take away access." Harper's lips twitched into a smile as she slid a draft across the counter. Subject, Notice of Corporate Suspension. Colby Ames. Let's give him one more loss. The building hadn't changed much. Same slate-gray facade, same gold-stamped signage above the double-glass doors, Ames Strategic Holdings, LLC. But today, as Carolyn and Harper walked in side by side, the air inside didn't feel familiar. It felt reclaimable. "They called it his company," Carolyn said, voice low, steady. "They forgot who co-signed the original loan." The marble in the entryway caught the morning light and bounced it back in clean white sheets. Every sound, the receptionist's clipped hello, the hum of muted keyboards, the occasional footstep on tile, felt sharpened, like the entire building had been holding its breath. It was Harper who found the paperwork 2 nights before. Dean, in all his structure and trust in the predictable, had never removed Carolyn as a co-owner. Legally, she still held 49% of the company's private shares. Enough to whisper, enough to move things. He never saw a reason to change it, Harper had said, reading through the scanned articles of incorporation with brows raised. And now neither do we. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was wordless. A small digital plaque blinked. Executive Suite. The button lit under Carolyn's fingertip like it knew her name. When they stepped into the corner office, Dean's old office, it was empty. The leather chair sat turned slightly away from the desk. No one had dared occupy it since the funeral. Framed contracts, pictures of clients, an old watch on a crystal dish. Still there. Carolyn let her fingers graze the edge of the desk. Harper stood beside her, holding a folder labeled Board Notification Packet. Inside, a signed directive from Carolyn, citing misuse of estate funds and financial misconduct under review. "Ready?" Harper asked, her voice a blend of compassion and weaponry. Carolyn nodded. "Let's put it in motion." By noon, the board had received the packet. Carolyn had cited her full authority to initiate a temporary suspension of Colby Ames from all company activities, pending financial review. Within an hour, Human Resources locked Colby's login credentials. Payroll froze his expense account. His calendar access was revoked. Even his LinkedIn profile, carefully curated, full of buzzwords and ego, suddenly reflected no current position. By 3:30, the front desk had received a call from Colby. He sounded confused. The receptionist whispered to Harper as she passed them on their way back out. Then, furious. In the elevator, Harper tucked her phone back into her purse. "They'll start spinning this in 3 hours. Tops." "They can spin until they're dizzy," Carolyn replied. "Gravity's still real." As they crossed the lobby, a young employee in a charcoal blazer, maybe 26, still unsure how much eye contact to make with senior staff, paused by the stairwell, then leaned slightly toward Carolyn. "We're glad it's you," she said quietly, almost in a breath. "We didn't know who would show up." Carolyn stopped. Just for a moment. Long enough to meet the girl's eyes. "Neither did I," she said. "Until now." Outside, the sky had turned a sharp blue, the kind that made the concrete shimmer. Harper handed Carolyn a manila envelope from her bag. "The reallocation paperwork," she said. "You sure you want to go this far?" Carolyn took the envelope without hesitation. "He counted on the company. I counted the company. Time it answered me instead." Inside the envelope, asset reallocation plan. Carolyn's signature already dry. Dividends, bonuses, and future shares were being rerouted, no longer tied to Colby or Jill's claims. Tomorrow the board would vote, and they wouldn't vote against the woman whose name was still etched on the founding charter. The check was already signed when Carolyn walked into Leon's office. A quiet morning sun filtered through the tall windows, highlighting the name at the top, the Dean Ames Foundation. The ink hadn't even dried on the LLC paperwork, but the weight of it had already settled in her hands. She didn't tremble. Not today. Leon looked up from behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, expression unreadable. "You're certain this is how you want to begin the trust?" Carolyn nodded once. "Start it loud, the rest can stay quiet." Across the table, Harper slid the first press draft forward, her touch precise, practiced. Adult literacy, caregiver support, fully nonprofit, backed by an audited endowment, seed, $250,000. Leon adjusted his tie, a habit more than a need. "Taken from Colby and Jill's pending residuals," he confirmed, eyes flicking toward Carolyn, the ones they assumed would transfer automatically. "They never read the fine print," she said coolly. "They never thought I could write it." The silence was thick for a beat. Then Leon gave a single nod. "I'll file it with the court and tax bureau before noon." By Thursday, the announcement hit the local paper. "Widow of business leader launches foundation in his name. Focus on education, dignity, legacy." A photo accompanied the article. Carolyn in a navy wool coat, hair wind-brushed but neat, standing in front of a brick building soon to be renovated for the foundation's offices. She wasn't smiling, but the headline didn't need one. That evening, Harper read the online comments out loud from her tablet as they sat on Carolyn's porch. "Ames family doing something meaningful? Finally," Harper quoted, raising a brow. "Makes you wonder where the rest of the family's been hiding." Carolyn's lips didn't move, but her eyes sparkled with something sharper than satisfaction. "Here's my favorite," Harper continued, scrolling. "Dean must be proud, not of his money, but of his wife's spine." Jill, of course, responded exactly how they expected. A cease and desist letter arrived within 2 days, arguing that using Dean's name without family board approval constituted reputational exploitation. Leon faxed a response back the same afternoon. Dean Ames, co-founder of the business bearing his name, designated his wife, Carolyn Ames, as successor and estate executor. Her use of his name in philanthropic context is protected by law, deed, and intention. Motion denied before it could stand. Carolyn never responded directly. She didn't need to. Instead, she visited the foundation's first literacy partner, a community center tucked between a laundromat and a corner store off Wally Avenue. She shook hands with the director, donated new shelves, left behind a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with a note inside the front cover, to someone ready to begin again. That night, Harper poured them both a glass of Pinot Noir and held her glass out with a crooked smile. "They'll hate this more than losing the money." Carolyn clinked her glass without hesitation. "Good. Then they'll feel it." Outside, the porch light flickered in the breeze. Inside, the printer hummed to life with a low, steady churn. Leon's voice crackled over the phone 10 minutes later. "Just received a letter from Colby's attorney. They're requesting a formal settlement meeting." Harper set her wine down. "That was fast." "Too fast," Carolyn said softly, eyes narrowing at the envelope in her hand. The letter was written on creamy stationery with an embossed letterhead and the smug scent of desperation. Carolyn read it once, no furrow in her brow, no flicker in her expression, and then slid it across the table to Harper. Colby's offer: drop the contest, avoid court, and in return receive dignified shares commensurate with familial ties. In plain English, hush money, dressed up in lawyer lace. Harper raised an eyebrow. Did he think he was negotiating with grief? Leon across the table only half smiled. His attorney called it a gesture of reconciliation. Carolyn tapped her fingers once, twice, 3 times against the rim of her teacup. "Then I'll reconcile with arithmetic." She leaned forward, opened her notebook, and slid a handwritten note across the polished oak. The ink was neat, loops elegant. The figure written at the top, $1. Harper didn't even blink. "Counteroffer." Leon blinked twice. "Just $1? "Symbolic," Carolyn said quietly. $1 to acknowledge the exchange, no more. That's all their behavior earned." Harper added the next blow without pause. "And a public apology. Statement format. Acknowledging false claims, misuse of assets, and an admission that Carolyn was the lawful and sole beneficiary from the start." Leon removed his glasses slowly. "They're not going to sign that." "They don't have to," Carolyn said, rising from her chair. "They just have to decline. Silence is fine. It's louder than anything they've said in court." She walked to the window, watching the light shift through the slats of the blinds. The wind outside had turned colder. Leaves curled at the edges of the porch, gathering in small, resentful piles. Across town, Colby sat behind a half-empty desk, 1 foot out the door of Dean's company, still refusing to believe the weight of the world no longer tilted in his favor. That same afternoon, Harper sent the $1 offer via certified mail, with tracking, timestamp, and delivery receipt. Attached was the formal settlement agreement and an unsigned apology template. 2 days passed, then 3. No answer. Carolyn didn't follow up. She baked a lemon loaf instead and brought half to the new literacy coordinator at the foundation. She rearranged Dean's cufflinks in their shadow box. She trimmed the hedge outside, humming low as the shears whispered through new growth. By Friday, Leon called. "They're stalling. They haven't replied." "Then that's the answer," Carolyn said, stacking plates in her cupboard. Leon exhaled. "They can't afford trial. They'll fold." "I'm not waiting for collapse," Carolyn replied. "Let the papers speak. They already told me who they are." That evening, Harper knocked on the screen door, a small box of truffle chocolates in hand. No word yet, but the foundation site just hit 12,000 visits. One donor listed her reason as, "because Carolyn didn't blink." Carolyn smiled without showing teeth. "That's enough for me." She hadn't even taken her coat off when the doorbell rang again. Harper stepped back. "You expecting anyone?" "No." When Carolyn opened the door, Jill was standing there, her arms wrapped around herself, shoulders trembling under a pale blue shawl. No makeup, no scowl, just skin sallow with regret and fingers twisting a crumpled tissue. Carolyn didn't move. She leaned against the doorframe with the stillness of someone who had learned to outlast storms. "I didn't come for a fight," Jill said quietly. Her voice cracked like thin porcelain. "You've already had your fight. Carolyn replied. "The court settled it for you." Jill's mouth trembled into something that might have been a smile or might have been sorrow. "That wasn't me. That was grief, anger. I didn't mean—" "You meant all of it," Carolyn cut in gently. "Not cruel, just clean." Silence bloomed like frost between them. Harper watched from the hallway behind, arms crossed, not interfering. Her presence alone made it clear. This wasn't an ambush. It was a reckoning. "I don't want anything," Jill said. "Not now." I swear Carolyn finally opened the door wide enough to gesture toward the porch chairs. "Tea?" Jill blinked. "You're offering me tea?" "You came here shaking," Carolyn said. "I figured you needed something warm." They sat side by side, not quite facing each other, a small wooden table between them. Carolyn poured from a ceramic pot into two mismatched mugs. The steam curled up like questions left unasked. For the first few sips, they didn't speak. Only the soft clink of porcelain, the muted rustle of dry leaves across the porch. "I miss him," Jill finally whispered. "Dean. He was the one who always made things decent. Like we weren't all just broken glass trying to stand upright." Carolyn's eyes stayed on the trees across the street. "He made things easy to love." Jill's hands trembled again. "I was angry you got the goodbye, the house, the history. It felt like you walked away with the whole story." "I didn't walk away," Carolyn replied. "I carried it." Jill looked up, mascara faint and streaked. "I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know I wasn't always like that." Carolyn didn't respond with words. She set her cup down, stood, and walked into the house. Harper stepped aside without a word as she passed. A minute later, Carolyn returned with a thin, flat package wrapped in linen. She placed it on the table between them. "What's this?" Jill asked. "An invoice," Carolyn said softly. "But not for you." Jill slowly unfolded the cloth. Inside was a single sheet of thick cardstock, one of Dean's old letterheads. Written in Carolyn's deliberate, looping hand were the words, "I cried once more, and then I took back every cent." Jill pressed her lips together. Her eyes swam again, but this time no one reached for tissues. Carolyn picked up her teacup and stood again. "You said you were grieving. I was too, but I didn't try to take what wasn't mine." Harper appeared at the threshold just as the porch light flicked on, casting a pale gold over the two women. Jill looked up at Carolyn like a child who'd just been told the lesson was over, but hadn't understood the point. "You'll be okay," Carolyn said, her voice quiet but final. "But we won't be the same." The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and stamped with the seal of the probate court. It didn't arrive with ceremony. It was wedged among a grocery flyer and a catalog, just another folded rectangle in the quiet hum of Carolyn's Thursday morning. But when she opened it, standing barefoot in her kitchen with the kettle just beginning to hiss, the world seemed to narrow around the first bolded line. "All contests dismissed. Sole beneficiary, Carolyn Ames." She set the letter down without a sound. Outside, a cardinal hopped along the backyard fence line, its crimson feathers catching in the morning light. In a small downtown office, Harper skimmed the identical copy from the court, clicked her pen, and whispered to herself, "Done." She sent the final digital filing to the IRS, closed out the accounting spreadsheets, and locked the archive folder labeled Estate Ames Final. An hour later, Harper drove over to Carolyn's for their usual Thursday review. But this time, there were no folders, no stapled addenda, no action items. Just a bottle of sparkling cider, a vanilla cake Harper had picked up from a bakery downtown, and two women sitting at a small dining table beneath a framed photo of Dean. "I thought we might celebrate," Harper said, placing the cake down. Carolyn glanced at the icing, where careful cursive read, "Nothing owed, nothing owed." "That's a bit morbid," Carolyn smiled. "Factual, though," Harper replied, sliding a plate toward her. "The foundation's clean. The books are closed. Every cent accounted for. They can't touch $1. That afternoon, Colby sold his Audi. A quiet Craigslist listing. The luxury lease hadn't been paid since the freeze, and when the buyer showed up, Colby didn't haggle. He barely spoke. The car pulled away, taking with it the last symbol of his illusion of status. Jill was already gone. packed up and moved to a cousin's home in Flagstaff. No forwarding address, no final words. Her last message to Harper, a single-line email, remained unread. That evening, Carolyn hosted a dinner at the community center's small conference room. She didn't dress in black. She wore a soft plum sweater, the one Dean once said made her look like she ruled a vineyard. The 6 members of the new Dean Ames Literacy Initiative gathered around the table, pouring wine, passing bread, talking quietly about the first adult student to pass their GED last week. At the head of the room hung 2 framed photos, one of Dean in his office, chin tilted toward the light, and beside it, a candid shot of Carolyn, caught mid-laugh during a foundation meeting. Underneath, a plaque read, "Built together, given forward." Harper tapped her glass. "To restoring what mattered. To outlasting," Carolyn added, lifting her glass, "and not apologizing for it." The toast was quiet, but solid. Later that night, back home in the hush of her study, Carolyn opened a small drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside was a bundle of old letters, yellowed, bound in faded green ribbon. On top, one envelope stood apart. The handwriting was unmistakably Dean's. Her breath caught. No stamp, no return address. Just, "To be read if I didn't get to say it." Carolyn stared at it for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the flap, then slowly peeled it open. The first line stared up at her with unnerving clarity. "If they ever try to make you cry for surviving me, remind them you built me." Her chest tightened, the kind of ache that didn't come from grief anymore, but from recognition. The penmanship was familiar, deliberate. Dean's R's always hooked low. His S had that faint slant, like it hesitated. She read slowly, afraid to lose the voice between the lines. "You stayed when I worked late, when I failed at year 3, when I forgot our anniversary but remembered the name of a vendor. You never made me pay for it. You just let me grow. And I did, because you didn't get in the way. You stood behind me like a foundation." Her breath hitched, but she kept reading. "I know what they're like. Jill and Colby. You saw it too. I didn't want to believe they'd turn, but if they do, if they try to twist the love you gave into a power grab, you have my full permission to burn it all down, to protect what we built. It's yours. I want no hero stories about me that don't include you. That's the deal." Carolyn's throat tightened as the words blurred for a moment. The quiet around her was too full. The grandfather clock ticked softly from the hallway, the wind brushed faintly against the shutters, and somewhere in the kitchen, the kettle clicked off its keep-warm cycle. She hadn't cried like this since the morning she woke up to his empty side of the bed, sheets still warm but already echoing absence. But this wasn't that kind of crying. This was something older, deeper. Release. Harper had arrived without knocking, like she always did now. She paused in the doorway, unsure whether to speak. Carolyn didn't notice at first. When she looked up, her voice was low but steady. He knew. Harper stepped closer, eyes scanning the open letter. She didn't ask to read it. Carolyn handed it over without a word. Harper sat beside her and read silently, her lips barely moving, her expression tightening. When she finished, she exhaled slowly. "He gave you the last word before they even opened their mouths." Carolyn nodded. "I cried when he left. I cried when they tried to steal him. I won't cry again." "You don't need to," Harper said. "You already wrote your ending." Carolyn looked over to the small writing desk in the corner, where a thick packet lay waiting. A fresh legal document, printed on bonded paper and tabbed with pastel post-its. The Carolyn Ames Revocable Trust. She rose without hurry, walked to the desk, and pulled out the capped pen from the drawer. Her fingers didn't tremble as she signed. Name, date, initials, and then, on the last page, a small, neat line beneath hers, Co-Executor Harper Fields. Harper blinked at it. "Carolyn, are you sure?" "Dean left me strength. I'm passing it forward. You know how to keep wolves out." "You're not leaving soon, are you?" Harper said, half joking. Carolyn smirked. "Not before I see Colby file for bankruptcy and Jill try to trademark the word mourning." They both laughed, but the sound was quiet, earned. Carolyn clipped the truss together, slipped it into a fireproof sleeve, and slid it into the cabinet beside Dean's backup directive. One folder marked the beginning of her fight. This one, the end of it. The photo had been sitting in her desk drawer for months, untouched, unsorted, unforgotten. It was snapped just after the service, when the air still smelled of lilies and wet soil, when grief and entitlement shared the same pews. In the image, Carolyn stood slightly apart, her face turned away, eyes cast downward. Behind her, Jill's lips curled into a smirk mid-sentence. Colby, half-shadowed, watched with that amused tilt of his head, as if already dividing what hadn't been given. Carolyn held the glossy print under the soft desk lamp. She studied the expressions, the timing, like a crime scene frozen in high definition. She slid it into a matte black frame, pressed the backing in, and turned it over. Etched across the bottom in clean, serif letters, just one word: recovered. She set it in the corner of her study, just below the window where the morning light hit strongest. Not out of revenge, just as a reminder of what silence looks like before it breaks. The Dean Ames Foundation, now 3 months in, had just funded its first citywide adult literacy night. Volunteers taught reading inside church basements and community centers. The foundation's logo, a minimalist tree, one leaf half gold, began showing up on flyers across New Haven, and for the first time in decades, people started saying her name alongside Dean's. Jill quietly moved to Arizona. No announcement, no farewell, just a change of address form mailed to Leon's office with a scrawled note, "Forward anything necessary." Colby's once constant social media activity slowed to a trickle. No more rented car selfies, no brunch stories. His last post, dated 4 weeks ago, read only, "People will show you who they are. Believe them the first time." The comments were few. No one asked questions. Carolyn didn't celebrate any of it. She just walked her new companion around the block each morning, a 14-year-old retriever mix with a limp and a stubborn streak. His name was Lloyd, and he had eyes that seemed to understand silence. "Better housemate than the last two," she joked once to Harper, who only chuckled as she filed receipts at the kitchen table. Their weekly meetings were quiet, methodical. Tax documents, trust fund updates, foundation grant tracking. Everything labeled, everything clean, no drama, no sudden letters or bank alerts, just the shuffle of pages and the whistle of the kettle. One afternoon, Harper handed over a sealed envelope with a grin. "From the school board," she said. Carolyn slid it open. Inside was a formal certificate and a short note. "The Jefferson Elementary Literacy Room will be officially renamed in honor of Carolyn and Dean Ames for contributions to student reading programs and elder mentorship." She ran her fingers over the printed seal, thumb brushing the gold-embossed lettering. No spotlight, no press release, just a reading room. Their names, together. Not on a check, but a door children would walk through. She folded the letter neatly and stood, walking to the study. She placed it just beneath the funeral photo. Recovery, framed above legacy. Lloyd let out a huff from his dog bed, tail tapping against the carpet once. Harper entered, mug in hand. "Want me to call the school? You should speak at the naming ceremony." Carolyn shook her head gently. Let the room speak. Outside, wind rustled the hedges lining the porch. The scent of fresh lavender, Harper's gift, floated in from the windowsill planter. There were no voices raised, no doors slammed, no money moving under tables. Just paper, time, and quiet rebalancing. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant rustle of late autumn leaves scraping across the stones. The air carried that dry, iron tang that arrives just before winter, sharp but not yet punishing. Carolyn moved slowly down the narrow gravel path, her heels crunching over broken acorns, her coat buttoned to the top. She didn't bring an umbrella this time. No one was watching. No performance needed. Dean's grave was where she left it, under the old elm in the corner plot that caught the morning light first. The marble was clean, plain. Dean S. Ames, Nitten Femtien til Tutusen og Chuetre. Partner, builder, beloved, nothing else. Carolyn had insisted on that word, not husband, not executive, beloved. It covered more truth than any resume ever could. She crouched carefully beside the stone, knees popping slightly, and placed a single ivory rose in the holder. Its scent was faint but clean, like linen left to dry in the cold wind. In her other hand, a sealed envelope. It was a check made out to the Dean Ames Foundation. Attached was a signed donation form earmarking it for the First Book initiative, helping adults learn to read alongside their children. The memo line read simply, "For the things we never said aloud." She slid the envelope beneath the vase's base, weighing it down gently. "I never stopped grieving," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I just stopped letting them measure it." There were no tears this time, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes not from absence, but acceptance. She stayed a moment longer, then stood, slow, deliberate. Back at home, Lloyd raised his head from his dog bed, blinked twice, and thudded his tail once against the floor. No bark, just acknowledgement. Carolyn walked into the kitchen, loosened her scarf, and pulled her journal from the counter. The leather was warm from sun that had streaked across it all morning. She flipped to the final page and wrote, "I cried once more, and then I got up." No flourish, no signature. She closed the journal, placed it on the shelf between her worn copy of Little Women and the photo album from her and Dean's 3rd anniversary trip, the one where he accidentally rented a stick shift in Vermont and had to learn on the fly. That weekend had smelled like pine, damp flannel, and maple syrup. Later that afternoon, at the Foundation's downtown reading center, a small boy, maybe 6, maybe 7, sat beside his mother at a tiny desk. His finger traced each word in a picture book, pausing only when he got stuck. Giraffe, he said, hesitant. His mother beamed. "Yes, giraffe. You got it." Carolyn watched from the doorway, unnoticed, her coat still on. Harper stood beside her, arms crossed gently. "That's the 3rd kid this week who's finished a full book with a parent," Harper whispered. Carolyn said nothing, just nodded once. Her smile was faint, not prideful, not performative, just real. The walls around them were painted a soft yellow. The Foundation's logo glowed faintly under the recessed lighting. On the opposite wall hung the original framed charter, the Dean Ames Foundation, for those still learning to speak loudly. A wind outside picked up. Somewhere a chime rang faintly against the glass door. Someone had entered or left. Harper turned to Carolyn. "You okay?" Carolyn replied after a moment. "They asked if I was still grieving," she said. "I told them. Not loudly."